Welcome to Who's That Pokemon, the most in-depth Pokemon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. If you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokemon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it somehow seems to get neglected by Pokemon fans, so I thought it was about time it got a podcast entirely dedicated to it. Today's episode is the 10th episode of the Indigo League series titled Bulbasaur and the Hidden Village. The Japanese title is basically the same, with Bulbasaur's name replaced with its Japanese counterpart. The episode first aired on June 3rd, 1997 in Japan, and on September 21st, 1998 in the United States. On this day in Pokemon history for the Japanese air date, there is nothing of note, which is a solid theme throughout the first 10 episodes of this podcast. However, on this day in Pokemon history for the American air date, in 2000, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge was released in Japan for the Game Boy Color, and I don't really have anything to say about this game. It's one of the rare games in the Pokemon franchise that I've actually never played, so yeah, I don't have anything to say about it other than I have heard pretty good things about Pokemon Puzzle Challenge and Pokemon Puzzle League as just solid puzzle titles, so I mean, one day I definitely will check it out, and hopefully I enjoy it as much as, well, other people seem to have enjoyed it. The screenplay for this episode was written by Yukiyoshi Ohashi. This was Ohashi's second episode after making his writing debut with The Waterflowers of Cerulean City, which just so happens to be my favourite episode of the show so far. So there's no pressure for Ohashi to follow it up with another sort of home run episode. The debuts for this episode: no recurring or major human characters debut here. However, we have a couple Pokemon debuts. We've got Ash's Bulbasaur and Oddish. The Who's That Pokemon for this episode is obviously Bulbasaur because he's the star. So with all the background info out of the way, it's time to jump right into that episode summary and discussion. This episode kicks off the way that many episodes will kick off throughout the series. Ash and his friends are wandering through the forest without a compass, trying to find the path to Vermilion City. Ash and Misty are fighting as usual, this time over who led them astray, while Brock tries to keep the peace among the group. They pause for a rest and Ash sees an Oddish taking a drink. Misty sends her Starmie to fight the Oddish so she can catch it. The Oddish is defeated by Water Gun, but Misty's Pokeball is deflected by a Bulbasaur vine before she can claim it. The Bulbasaur attacks and defeats Starmie. Ash sends his Butterfree after the Bulbasaur with a Sleep Powder attack, but Bulbasaur blows the powder back at Butterfree. Both the Oddish and the Bulbasaur then run off into the forest.
Bulbasaur are extremely tough and very difficult to capture in the wild.
Bulbasaur! Oh, Starmie, are you okay?
I thought it was kind of neat how this episode kicks off with the gang quite literally walking in tall grass to start the episode. Yeah, I probably wasn't even a reference to the game, but I did like them walking through actually visually tall grass. Just makes it feel like the actual games. To begin this episode, they're really continuing the theme of Misty and Ash being intense rivals and not really liking each other. I think it would be a bit of a stretch at this point to call them friends. They're sort of frenemies, I guess, at this point. Whereas even later on in this region, I think it cools down a lot and they become, I guess, what you could call friends. And then I think in Johto, they're definitely they still have a little bit of a rivalry every now and then. It's a little bit, they antagonize each other, but it's way toned down compared to how they first get off with one another. As I've mentioned quite a bit in these first few episodes, Ash immediately trying to catch Oddish again shows just how much they're pushing the catching nature of the franchise at the moment, which is something that sort of fades away, especially when it comes to Ash's character. When Ash flips out his Pokédex, Dexter says researchers are unsure whether to classify Bulbasaur as a plant or animal, which just really made my ears perk up when I was watching the episode, which, you're not sure whether it's a plant or an animal. It's clearly an animal. Sure, it does have its bulb on the back, but what kind of plant have you ever seen that's walking around, doing this kind of thing? It's quite clearly an animal. Also, kind of going back to last episode where I sort of went on a bit of a rant about how Misty, and I guess Brock as well, are never made to look too strong in the show, which is a little bit weird considering they're gym leaders and they should be strong, at the very least stronger than Ash at this point, at least in an all-round sense. But Bulbasaur destroying Starmie just with one tackle, It again shows how weak Misty is being portrayed here, which is a little bit strange considering, she's supposed to be a gym leader and like the most competent gym leader out of her sisters at the Cerulean Gym. The trio then comes to a rope bridge and attempt to cross it, but a wind starts and it rips the bridge apart. Brock falls into the river below while Misty and Pikachu cling to Ash. Ash ultimately manages to pull them up and the three make their way to the end of the bridge. They make their way down to water level and go looking for Brock. At once, Misty falls into a pit trap, not unlike those that we have seen by Team Rocket. Ash pulls her out and they go on looking. As they walk along, Misty's toe catches a rope and they find themselves suspended in a net. They are then found in this state by a Bulbasaur. It's the same Bulbasaur as before. Ash then speculates that Brock has been washed to sea and shanghaied by pirates. Moments later, Brock appears and frees them from the trap. Brock relays his river experience and the fact that he was rescued from the rapids by a girl. Brock takes them to a village and introduces them to a girl named Melanie.
I can't find this bridge on my map.
When watching this, Brock should probably be dead after falling off the bridge. Not only does he fall a ridiculously tall height, there's a lot of jagged rocks shown below. So, Brock surviving is nothing short of an absolute miracle. Kind of on that same track of being a little bit unrealistic, Ash just has superhuman strength to not only hold on to Misty's extra weight when the bridge sort of rips in half, but to also pull them up to safety. That takes so much strength to do, even considering like Misty and Ash are supposed to be young, so they probably don't weigh, as much as a full-grown adult, so it's probably, not as much to hold on to. Still, pulling yourself up like that takes a hell of a lot of strength. Clearly, Ash has been hitting the weights before he set out onto his journey. It's not bad from a 10-year-old. There's a dub change here at this moment. The exchange between Ash and Misty at the bridge is altered. In the dub version, Ash is losing confidence and Misty encourages him, whereas in the original version, Ash says Misty is far too heavy and Misty berates him for implying that she's fat and says she doesn't weigh that much. So, it's much more wholesome, the dub version, but the Japanese version really sort of, again, is continuing that theme of Ash and Misty just antagonizing one another, even in a life or death situation. I do like that the multiple traps that Ash and Misty fall into here, they kind of initially make you think that they're about to encounter Team Rocket when it's actually traps to protect the sanctuary. You see them and you're like, oh, this has got Team Rocket written all over it. Team Rocket are going to burst in here and, do their motto, and we're going to be, pretty heavily focused on Team Rocket in this episode. And then it turns out, nope, it's actually traps set up by someone else. I think it's a nice little fake out. And I did enjoy it, because at first I'm like, what? Oh, does Team Rocket appear that early in this episode? And it's like, nope, you've actually just been tricked by some clever writing. Another dub change here. So there's another different exchange, this time when they are caught in the second trap and are obviously cramped. In the dub, Ash attempts to break out of the net and Misty tells him that his plan isn't working. In the Japanese version, Ash attempts to break the net but the shaking of the net starts when Misty tells him his attempt to break out, leading to him touching her in inappropriate places, which I don't have to explain to you why they left that one out of the show. I'm sure the dubbers immediately when they saw that were like, yep, that one's got to go. We're not talking about a young girl's inappropriate places on American television. I think when they're caught, Ash's obsession with pirates here is real funny. He just keeps going back to stating that Brock has been captured by pirates. Pirates, I should say. Pilots would be very strange for him to have been caught by. I don't know. I love it in shows when all of a sudden a character has a strange obsession with something random like that. But fun fact, when Ash is guessing about what happened to Brock, he obviously speculates that he was picked up by pirates in the dub. But in the original Japanese airing, he guesses that he was picked up by an ugly old hag washing clothes in the river. And gonna be honest, I think I like the pirate gags much more than just a old ugly hag washing clothes in the river. I think the pirate sort of obsession is funnier, and the fact that he keeps going on with it is a lot funnier than him just being like, oh yeah, an old hag was washing clothes and then picked him up. Bit of trivia here. This is one of the few times a knife, in this case a hunting knife, is seen in the anime. I guess they probably didn't really care too much because the knife is just used as a tool rather than something threatening, as is the case with the guns that we will see later on down the track. So, more trivia, this time to do with Melanie. She is voiced by Tara Jane in the dub. Jane worked on the show until the 7th season, mostly in character of the day roles. As far as I can tell, this is her debut on the show right here. She also serves as the voice for Ash's Bulbasaur, so again having another significant role in this episode. Later on, she would go on to voice Richie, Sammy Oak, who is in Pokemon Forever, and Bianca, who is in Pokemon Heroes. Also, Tori Lund in Destiny Deoxys, so had a pretty solid run there in the movies. She would return to the franchise in 2016 to provide voices for Pokemon Generations. And those who are fans of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you might recognize her as the voice of Mokuba Kaiba. And continuing the Melanie theme here, in Pokemon Yellow, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, a girl based on Melanie appears in Cerulean City. Unlike the anime, in which she lives in an obviously rural area, in Yellow she will give out a Bulbasaur if the player's friendship with the starter Pikachu is 147 or higher. However, in the Let's Go games, she gives the player a Bulbasaur if they've caught 30 or more individual Pokemon. So, it is, I guess, slightly based on Melanie, but like it's not really completely based on her. I guess the spirit of you getting all the starters is there, but I think with the Bulbasaur one, unlike the one you see with sort of Charmander, where the trainer says like, oh, they're not good enough to train it. It sort of links back to Damien. This one doesn't link too heavily back to Melanie. So, back to the episode. Ash and Misty notice a large number of Pokemon in the village and wonder if they belong to Melanie. Brock explains that the hidden village is a place for abandoned or injured Pokemon to come to rest and relax and sort of regain their strength. Melanie cares for them until they are better, and then they leave off back into the wild. Melanie collects plants to use for medicine, though she says that she's unqualified to be a Pokemon doctor. Misty teases Brock for falling in love with Melanie, and he reacts a little violently, fearing that Melanie might overhear them. Melanie explains that she set the traps, including the rope bridge, to prevent Pokemon trainers from reaching the village and protect the injured Pokemon from being captured. Meanwhile, Jessie, James, and Meowth try to cross the remains of the bridge, but it collapses underneath them and they fall into the river rapids.
Oh!
Melanie, this is Ash and Misty.
Hello. So you're Brock's friends. He told me all about you. Great! Wow, look at that! Do all those Pokemon belong to you? Oh, no.
This is a place where Pokemon are able to rest and relax.
Like summer camp?
Well, sort of, but all year long. You see, when Pokemon get abandoned or injured, they can come here.
Team Rocket has really settled into a pattern 10 episodes into the show. They're just complete comedic relief. Whereas, if you watch the first, maybe the first couple episodes, I think even after their first episode that they're debuted in, they sort of become comedic relief. But in the first episode, they really played straight. There's no sort of like, oh, okay, this is a comedic team. They really come across as like, oh no, these are the bad guys in the show, and Ash is going to have to seriously watch out for them as he progresses throughout the series. But no, they basically immediately settle into this pattern where they're just like, everything goes wrong for them. They can't do anything right. They're trying so desperately, putting so much time, effort, money into all their plans, but no matter what they do, it just blows up in their face. And we've got to go back to Brock's reaction to Misty teasing him about falling in love with Melanie. Brock actually punches Misty in the head twice here, and they keep it in. I have no idea how 4Kids decides to censor things anymore. I've spoken about this in previous episodes. They cut out Misty slapping Ash 2 different times, but they've left in some other like minor sort of violent moments. But here, Brock just straight up socks Misty in the head twice. Like full on left, right, good night, Mike Tyson swinging for the fences. And they just left it in, which I have no idea why this gets kept in, but all those other things get edited or replaced or just cut out completely. It's so confusing to me, and I would really love to ask someone from the dubbing team, why does this get to stay in And why does something else that's pretty damn similar get to, be jettisoned from the show? Brock makes a promise to Melanie that they'll not try to catch any of the Pokemon in the village. Despite her earlier attempts to catch Oddish, Misty concurs and agrees to go along with this. Ash worries if the traps are enough to keep robbers away, noting the idiocy of being caught in them. The camera cuts to Team Rocket, who have just fallen into their third pit trap as they try to make their way to where the gang are. They finally manage to get out, only to immediately get caught in a net. Brock and Ash tend to Staryu, while Misty apologises to the Oddish she attempted to catch before. She and Ash begin quarrelling, and the Bulbasaur tackles Misty, thinking Oddish is in danger. Melanie explains that Bulbasaur has volunteered to protect the whole village, and then Bulbasaur attempts to nudge Ash out of the village because it doesn't trust Pokemon trainers. So I felt that after Misty had her sort of heart-to-heart with Oddish, it sort of felt like the natural progression was for Misty to catch Oddish. Like, she really opens up to it, has this emotional speech, and, like, usually when somebody does that in this show, it ends in, like, oh, okay, you're going to join the team now. But no, it doesn't, and I was like, for a moment when she was having that speech, I'm like, did I forget about Misty catching an Oddish here? And then, obviously, it turns out that she doesn't catch Oddish. But yeah, it just, the way it's written, it really, really makes you believe that Misty is going to end up catching Oddish despite the promise that they all made. I think Bulbasaur shoving Ash's leg and trying to get him to leave the village is just ridiculously funny here. Bulbasaur is just acting like such a little arsehole. I know it's just trying to protect the village, but the way it just shoves Ash in the leg, it's like a minor annoyance, but it's like such a little like annoying, like little annoying gesture, and I love it. I love how much personality that Ash's Bulbasaur has even before he's caught it and had it join his team. Suddenly, Team Rocket appears from behind a cloud, standing on a balloon-lifted platform, and they recite their team motto. They land in a clearing outside of the village and try to collect all the Pokemon in the village with a massive vacuum. As Brock herds everyone into the cabin, Oddish gets caught in the suction. Bulbasaur rescues Oddish with its Vine Whip, and Ash helps block the wind so it can carry Oddish to the cabin. Team Rocket move the vacuum directly over the cabin, so Bulbasaur uses its vine to smack the hose around. Ash instructs his Pidgeotto to use Gust, and this causes a tornado that tosses Team Rocket and their platform into the distance.
Pidgeotto! I choose you! Pidgeotto! Gust attack!
And the tornado's winding up.
But will it strike us out?
There goes the whole ball game!
So before I mention anything else, what in the ever-loving fuck is this huge balloon contraption that Team Rocket has here? It reminds me of Lawrence III's over-designed ship in The Power of One. It's literally a flying stadium, but then that flying stadium is just an excuse to hide a vacuum that sucks up the Pokemon. The design here makes absolutely no sense. Like, it would have made more sense if they were somehow, like, flying over just a big vacuum, but instead they fly over a big stadium with a vacuum concealed in it, which gives off the impression that they've concealed the vacuum inside this stadium so that, like, it's a bit conspicuous, like, so people don't really recognize, like, oh, that's a flying vacuum here. But a flying stadium is just as, like, it's just going to set off alarm bells. Like, why is there a big flying stadium coming towards me? It makes absolutely no sense. Team Rocket's vacuum damn near sucks up an entire house here, so I'm just blown away. They've really gone out and bought the best possible vacuum we've seen so far, and I mean, you can't fault them for the amount of efforts that's gone into this this attempt on stealing a bunch of Pokemon. Really, this whole Team Rocket appearance is, like, it's just a generic Team Rocket appearance. It's one of the kind of filler appearances that they have. But I think the fact that their big balloon stadium vacuum, it's so absurd. It makes this from being like, oh, okay, run-of-the-mill, generic Team Rocket appearance, whatever. I'll never think about this ever again. But the absurdity just, like, makes it memorable, and in a way it makes it from a generic appearance to a non-generic appearance, which I really enjoyed. During this appearance, James makes a reference to the Japanese baseball player Hideo Nomo, who was playing for the Major League Baseball's Los Angeles Dodgers at the time of the initial airing. This is obviously in the Japanese version, and this happens when Pidgeotto blows the stadium away. James actually makes quite a few baseball references here. For some reason, just got an obsession, and I guess the baseball references justifies this stadium that they brought in, but still, that's a very loose justification for it. Melanie asks Ash to take the Bulbasaur with him, seeing the pair as a good match, and the village is too small for its bulb to grow. She says that the other Pokemon have stayed in the village far too long because Bulbasaur has done too good a job of protecting them. Bulbasaur agrees to go with Ash on condition that they battle first. Ash sends Pikachu, who dodges Bulbasaur's vines, but is then tackled. Bulbasaur uses its Vine Whips to slam Pikachu into the ground, but Ash calls for a Thunderbolt, which uses Bulbasaur's vines as wires to shock it into submission. This allows Ash to catch it. Brock offers to stay and help, but Melanie refuses, telling him to continue on his adventures. The trio and Bulbasaur wave goodbye to Melanie as they continue their journey towards Vermilion City.
Oh, Pikachu, Thunderbolt! All right, Pokeballs, go! We did it! We got Bulbasaur! Pikachu!
So we've got a dub change here. In the dub, when Melanie asked Ash if he thought Bulbasaur would be a good addition to the team, Ash responded, "Boy, would he ever." Melanie also says Ash will take great care of him. Bulbasaur's gender isn't stated in the original version, but yeah, they apparently call him a male here, and I'm not sure if it's revealed later on if Bulbasaur is a male or a female, but yeah, the dub just decided to refer to Bulbasaur as a boy. I do like that Brock tries to stay with Melanie here. I think it makes a lot of sense considering what his goals in life are, and it also, it makes him staying with Professor Ivy seem far less out of the blue later on, because he states initially that he's all about, being, a Pokemon breeder, and he's all about raising Pokemon. That's what he loves to do, rather than battling. And here, the first time we run into someone that kind of works in that field, he tries to stay with them. So his little absence when he goes and stays with Professor Ivy does make a whole lot of sense when you take sort of moments like this into account. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. It's really kind of a brief episode. Obviously it runs the same length as all the other episodes, but I think not a whole lot actually happens here. It just, when you go through it, there's not a whole lot to comment on, there's not a whole lot going on. And it makes it seem like the episode's really sort of small, even though a major thing does happen. He catches Bulbasaur. But as I said, that's it for this episode, so it's time for my thoughts on the quality of this episode. I think this is another great episode written by Yukiyoshi Ohashi. Unfortunately, it gets let down in the animation department. There's just so much shoddy animation going on in this episode, and I sort of left that out of my summary and discussion because I wanted to sort of wrap up all the errors in one go, rather than focusing on them bit by bit throughout the episode. Just overall, it's poorly animated, and that's even without getting into the animation errors, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit. This episode just overall looks so cheap, and that's saying something considering the animation isn't exactly stellar at this point in time. Pokemon is known as a show where its animation isn't exactly kind of up to snuff, especially at this point in time. It honestly really felt like they were trying to cut corners to bring down the production time or cost. A great example of this is during Melanie's emotional speech near the end of the episode, they use almost nothing but static shots for at least 30 seconds. It just cuts from a close-up of Melanie to a close-up of Brock to a close-up of Ash to Pikachu to Misty, and they're not doing anything. They're not even moving. Maybe they'll blink, maybe they'll move their mouth a little bit, but it's just really static, basic shots. They honestly must have pumped this episode out extremely quick. I have no idea how this episode would have taken the same amount of time as something like Showdown in Pewter City or even School of Hard Knocks, which had so much more going on. Having said that, the writing in this episode is stellar in my opinion. I know that Ohashi has only written 2 episodes so far, but it seems like he's the clubhouse leader at the moment for best writer on the show. He just really seems to nail the tone and spirit of the franchise, and he's got really great comedic sense, I think. Maybe it's just clicking with me a lot, but I think the way he writes just really appeals to sort of what I really what I really value when it comes to sort of writing on television and in movies. I think obviously some credit needs to go to the 4Kids team adapting this as well. Obviously I'm watching this dubbed, so not everything that Ohashi wrote is coming across one-to-one, and obviously the dubbers are changing quite a bit here and there, so shout out to the dub team. They get a lot of shit, and I've said that I want to give them credit where credit's due, and in cases like this, it's very much warranted. Overall, this is just a really entertaining episode from start to finish. Even having a run-of-the-mill Team Rocket appearance is made so much better by their balloon contraption being so bizarre. I think huge thumbs up from me for this episode. So to recap the major events of Bulbasaur and the Hidden Village, Misty tries and fails to catch an Oddish, and Ash catches a Bulbasaur. Ash Ketchum's win-loss record here, still at 2 wins and 2 losses. We obviously had no trainer battles in this episode, and he's still on a 1-win streak. Now it's time for some more trivia. Not a whole lot more to talk about here, but we do still nonetheless have a few more things to address. This episode was featured on Volume 7 Bulbasaur from Viz Media's Pokemon All-Star series, which it's a bit of a no-brainer considering this is basically the Bulbasaur episode. The plot for this episode was actually reused in the episode Getting Twiggy With It, which would feature a Turtwig protecting a hidden area for injured Pokemon, which was also aided by a woman, and it would then be caught after deciding to go with Ash. So they basically just rehashed this episode completely for Turtwig, which, I mean, you're going to start reusing episode ideas when you've written so many episodes, like such as the Pokemon series has, but to have it like reused, especially with the grass starter, it just seems like a little bit lazy there. Final bit of trivia is that Melanie appears in a flashback during episode 225, Bulbasaur the Ambassador. Other than that, Melanie has never been seen again, at least to my knowledge. So as for the errors in this episode, I'll touch on it here as I mentioned I would. This episode is just full of animation errors. By Bulbapedia's count, there are at least 19 minor errors present here, which is basically one per minute, considering episodes run for roughly 20 to 21 minutes, which that is just absurd. You have 19 animation errors in this episode in a 21-minute show. Just way too much. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but considering that the animation quality for this episode seems to be a little bit cheap, they use a lot of very, staticky shots, and then they still have 19 animation errors. It's like, come on, guys. I don't know why they dropped the ball so hard here, because the previous 9 episodes, sure, there'd been errors, but nothing to this degree, and none of the episodes seem to have been animated, on such a time crunch or with, the sort of ideal of keeping the cost down. It just, I don't know why this episode in particular is animated so poorly, and honestly, if it was animated better, it could potentially take the crown for my favourite episode so far, but just the animation lets it down completely. But enough complaining about the animation, it's time to jump into some Pokemail. Now, it'll be no surprise to see that my question of the episode this week is centered all around Bulbasaur. I want to ask you guys, what's your favourite moment featuring Ash's Bulbasaur? Personally, I have a soft spot for Bulbasaur's Bulbabai in the Pikachu's Vacation short film, which I have no idea why, but when I wrote that question out, the first moment that sprung to mind for me was the Bulbabai in Pikachu's Vacation, which I guess it might have something to do with the sheer amount of times I watched my Pokemon the First Movie VHS as a kid, and just the fact that I've seen Pikachu's Vacation so much. It's probably the case where I've seen Bulbasaur the most, so that's probably why it's stuck with me throughout all these years. But I'm interested to see what all of you guys say is your favourite moment featuring Ash's Bulbasaur. That just about does us for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, pretty much any podcast service you can find. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMN Pod to keep up with the latest updates for the show. And I'm on Twitter as @SourceMarlow. That's all for this episode. I hope you can join me again next time as I look back at the extremely iconic episode, Charmander the Stray Pokemon. This is the second episode in the 3-part arc where Ash catches all of the Kanto starters.